start. Um, Thank you all for coming to this session. My name is Michael Pratt. We're talking about the new NIST Privacy Framework, which they're about to come out with the next release, hopefully in the next month or so. I am curious, by show of hands, how many of you feel that your job is 100% security, whether you call it information security or cybersecurity? A couple. How many of you feel that your job is 100% privacy? How many of you feel that your job is a mix of both security and privacy? Okay, so this is interesting. Uh, Brief bio on myself. I'm from South Florida. I've been doing cybersecurity work for over 20 years now. I started off as a system administrator, moved into security with a little company called Motorola. You might have heard of them. Then moved into being a security consultant, doing a lot of security risk assessments. While doing that, a big bulk of the kind of company that I was dealing with was healthcare companies, which meant HIPAA regulation, which has the security rule and the privacy rule. And because of that, I got dragged in doing more and more privacy stuff. I wasn't too keen on. I was like, "Oh, I'm with the person. Why am I doing this privacy stuff?" But that was the way it was. So I had a lot of privacy policies and dealing with companies' privacy officer and so forth. Taking a look at how they were handling that. Even writing privacy policies for some of our clients. I left that and now work as a director of security compliance for a small company, but that makes me both the CISO of the company as well as the privacy officer of the company. So, because we do work in the healthcare space. Thankfully, it's not a whole lot of stuff when it comes to privacy because, we're not a healthcare provider or that's what we happen to receive some amount of PHI. So I've been involved with kind of both, more security, but I've had a lot of privacy. So that's kind of where this has come from. I picked this slide up several years back. I thought it very interesting for the privacy train wreck. The train going in, down, and the funny thing was I used to be that person down at the bottom, the consultant. I'm going to fix it. Now I'm up there with the privacy officer. But we've been seeing more and more of the issues of issues with privacy breaches of various sorts, not just from healthcare, but from retail and things like that. And I don't see that going away. I'm going to do some definitions, talk a little bit about privacy regulations, which is becoming a bigger and bigger matter. Touch a little bit on NIST and the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. And then we'll get into the privacy framework itself. And then I always like to give resources at the end of where you guys can go to for further information beyond what we talked about today. So I just want to make sure people are aware of some of these. I do find some of people are a little bit confused about them. We have PII, which is just personally identifiable information. It's information that identifies a particular person. And of course, sometimes it can be vague. So like, oh, I have a Michael Brown in Orlando. Oh, there might be several people named that in Orlando. So that's not enough to be PII because it doesn't identify a specific person. It has to be enough to identify that. Then you have PHI, and that stands for protected health information. Most people misunderstand what the P stands for. And that's just basically personal identification with medical information. Again, it has to be enough to identify a particular person and their medical condition. Another term you might hear is NPI, non-public information. That I usually see that being used as more of its PII plus financial information, your bank account and this sort of stuff. If we get into credit card, we actually don't use the term credit card. We use cardholder data. So if you guys get a chance to get into PCI work, you're going to see CHD a lot. And a lot of times we use the term just personal data or sensitive data as there's kind of a general term for all of these things. I hear a lot like, oh, I have to deal with sensitive data. We have to worry about sensitive data. So some security definitions. I got this from David Froud, who has a pretty big blog. So for those of us from our security side, most of would hopefully understand this. So we have security, which is all aspects of security from both physical to logical. And sometimes even when we might be cybersecurity professionals, sometimes we have to deal with physical data. I used to be a security assessor, and I'd go into a company or organization, and sort of, I'm not just looking at the computer systems. I'm looking at, oh, do you have doors? Do you have cameras? Do you have alarms? Oh, you've got all this paper records of information. Where is it? Is it all up on a desk where anyone can get to it, or is it hopefully in a secure room somewhere? Then again, the data security, which again, it's data in all its form, whether it's physical, like paper records, or on a computer. And then you get into cybersecurity, which is more of just it's data in computer form. And privacy is on the same thing. I'm not sure where I got these. But kind of within here, when we talk about data privacy, is we get into things that most of us as security people, we're like, I don't really necessarily care about that. But when it comes to privacy, we do things such as how are we collecting that data? You know, what are we using it for? Did we get permission to get that data? What happens when we give that data to someone else? And a lot of times that falls under various regulations. GDPR, we're seeing more and more states doing regulations. And then data protection deals with things like unauthorized use, corruption, loss, and things like that, which again, from a security standpoint, a lot of time we're like, we don't care about it. You got the data, it's stored, that's the end of what my concern. But from a privacy side, we have to worry about the other aspects. So you can see a lot of this, kind of like a Venn diagram where there is a lot of overlap. In many cases, for a lot of us, even though we might feel we're going to be over here, we're oftentimes in here, right in the middle, dealing with both aspects. And this also is a good one here. Shows kind of like, the overlap between security and privacy. Again, with security, we got our CIA triad, which I think most of us are aware of. But on privacy, we're worrying about things like how you collecting that data. Did you get consent to collect that data? And that's one thing we're always hearing about is, you go shopping and you do things, and the business is watching what you shopping for and collecting that data and using it. What I kind of think is kind of an apt explanation to me. I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but you're on your computer to go and do some searching for something, and then you go to another website and you're getting targeted ads for what you search for. I see that a lot, which to me is like super, super annoying. I'm a member of ISACA, for instance. So yeah, I go to the ISACA website, every so often. And then I go over to YouTube, and guess what I get? I get ads for ISACA. Which one, it's why does YouTube know that I went to the ISACA website? And then the second aspect, which I think is kind of equally annoying, is I'm a freaking member. I don't need to have an ad from the organization I'm a member of, because I know that they're paying for those ads. It's like, so I don't know which I'm more annoyed about, the fact that, Yahoo knows what I'm searching, as well as, an organization part is wasting their money to send me targeted ads. Another thing also with privacy that we don't really worry about security is the access. Typically when in security, we're worried about, the employee are they authorized to have access to that data? In privacy, we're worried about, this is a child. Is their parent allowed to have access to that data, whatever that data may be, whether it's educational data or medical data, or it's a spouse and they have access to the other member's medical information, or it's a family member. Those are some of the aspects that we worry about in privacy that on the security side, we're like, got data access. That's all we care about. Quality is also an issue. We see a lot of times the kind of concept of like, oh, you got my data. I want to see it. I want to be able to examine and say, yeah, that's accurate, or no, that's not. I want that changed. You know, and there's also the thing you've heard of the terms of, right to be forgotten. You got my data. I want you to get rid of it. So these are things that are coming up more on the privacy side. That again, on the security side, we're like, we got the data. It's stored securely and it's being backed up. That's all we care about. Yeah, I like using some of these funny memes to kind of like it. So we're seeing more and more with privacy regulations. More and more states are doing regulations. In Florida, we have FIPA, which is Florida Information Privacy Act, um, and more states are looking at it. Of course, the big, I call the big one is GDPR from Europe. It had things such as the right to be forgotten, um, privacy by design. Hopefully most of you guys have heard the term security by design. You design a system to be secure from the get-go as opposed to bolting it in afterward. And so now we're talking, now you're getting the term privacy by design. And they talk about things like having, we have a business impact analysis. Now we talk about having a data privacy impact analysis. What's the impact on the business from, data standpoint, and the term of DPO, that's a data privacy officer, which is, that's also what I am as well. Whether you call me a chief privacy officer or a data privacy officer, it's all the same thing. In the US, the big daddy has been California with CCPA and CPRA, things like protected, but they're more focused on the consumer data versus like the medical information and so forth. Things like no selling of the data. That's a big thing. Like, oh, this company goes and figures out all of the information about people and then goes and sells it. That way they can sell the information about you. And we're seeing more and more states, popping up. This is one I got from IAPP. If you're into privacy and you're not familiar with IAPP, you should. I'll talk a little bit more about them later on. This is one of the recent maps they've done for states. And it's interesting is we got the light gray, no comprehensive bill introduced. So there's a lot of states that have nothing. Then the dark gray is inactive bills. The one that are green, that's the ones that have signed bills, but there's not that many. And they do update this on a regular basis. They also have this tracker. I actually brought a copy of it. That's this thing here, which you can get off their website. They're good about having some information anyone can get access to, and some you have to be a member of. This is one thing, the ones that you don't have to be a member to access, but still. And they do update it and give information, link things to it so you can figure out what the heck's going on. So, and this changes all the time. They update it probably a couple times a year. And the thing is that depending on your business and where you're located, either you care about what other states are doing, or you better, because if you've been doing business there, it will affect you. Okay, NIST. Hopefully, you guys have most of you have. Hopefully, everyone of you have heard of NIST, but for those who have not, this is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Some people think it means science technology. It's not. They are a part of the Department of Commerce. They are a non legislative branch in terms of they don't go and they don't set laws or regulations. They just come up with standards. Others then take those and and you do it. So I think for most of us, we probably are familiar with the Special Publications 800 series of documents that is available to anyone to make use of. They also have come up with a newer series on 1800 series. They're the ones that came up with the cybersecurity framework, the risk management framework, some other standards. Pretty good organization. What's also good is, again, because they're a public body, is that when they come up with a new draft of a document, they put it out there and say, hey, got a new draft. If anyone wants to comment on it, feel free to do so. So it's a chance for all of us who want to put in a word about something they're working on, you can do so. So the cybersecurity framework, hopefully people are aware, it first started off with an executive order in 2013. They went through, had a whole bunch of workshops, released the first version in 2014, had more workshops. I actually got to go to those. That was pretty interesting. Had the next version in 2018, more workshops, and I think these were virtual, and released the 2.0 in 2024. So about 5 years or so between these different versions have been popping up. Again, these are the 5 components of the cybersecurity framework. The core is what most people focus on. Those are the actual controls of it. Then you have the profile, which is meant to be, current and the future profile to kind of figure out where you're going and what you need to be doing. And then the tiers, which are this kind of a sort of a maturity model that's not quite a maturity model. And as a consultant working with companies, most people really don't like the tiers. And as also as attendees to these workshops, it seems like a common theme was like most people were like, we don't like the tiers. But they're there. This is, of course, Framework 2.0. That's the new logo they did for it, because now they have 6 functions about in the categories and subcategories. They then match up those subcategories to implementation examples, i.e., here's how you can implement this subcategory, as well as informative references. They have profiles, and what I really like is that in the time the cybersecurity framework has come out, it's had an enormous amount of attention. I'm actually been kind of very surprised by, even though they initially created the cybersecurity framework really for U.S. companies, I've always been very surprised by how big of an interest of this is overseas, to the point where they've translated it into other countries, other languages. Even at the workshop, they had people from other countries, wanting to make use of it and so forth. The informative references, which is basically a crosswalk to other standards. NIST kind of went like, hey, this is too much for us to do a crosswalk. They put it over to other people to do it, like, oh, PCI, we're not going to do the crosswalk. We want you to do the crosswalk from PCI to cybersecurity framework and so forth. And so we've got a whole lot of these informative references put together. And then the profiles were great, because what I liked about those was that, if you're in a different industry, you're like, okay, how do I use this framework in my industry? And so these different groups and what I would come up with, like, okay, you're in, healthcare, here's a healthcare framework, sorry, profile and so forth. So it's, in my mind, pretty good in terms of like the enthusiasm for it. I just kind of wish we had that for the privacy framework. So the privacy framework, they started it in 2018, had a workshop, risk information, another workshop. And if I remember correctly, I think all these workshops were online. They weren't in person. Finally, we have released the first one in 2020. So about 5 years, from then. And then in 2024, they had a concept paper for the next workshop. And just as with the cybersecurity, it went from version 1 to 1.1. We did the same thing with the privacy framework. And so this is where we're at now. So in Q2 of this year, they put out the initial public draft. I actually brought hard copy. This is version 1 of the privacy framework. And this is what I do. I like paper. Sorry. Give me a freaking book. I don't give me and I go down to like an office store and have them bind it. But this is 1.0. This is the 1.1 draft. I'm waiting for them to have the full version, and then I'll do the same thing. Sorry, that's just the way I am. Put out a request for comments. Sorry, they did not do a workshop. I kind of wish they did. And so we're at the end of Q3, right around there. So I'm hoping, this looks like October, November, December. So next month we'll see the full release. And kind of expect that it'll probably, whatever we will get won't be too different from what we had here, but we'll see. And again, what's good about it, if you're familiar with the cybersecurity framework, the privacy framework has the same kind of structure. We got the core, which are the controls. We got the profile concept of, your current and your future profiles, with the idea of having, community profiles, which we really haven't gotten those yet. And then, of course, our favorite part of the framework, which is, of course, the implementation tiers. So 1.0 came out in January with a clunky name, 5 functions, category, subcategories, informative references. From the get-go was not in the framework itself, but online, again, profiles and tiers. With 1.1, they've reduced the name to just the privacy framework 1.0. It's now CSWP. That's Computer Security White Paper. That's a new document series that NIST has of these white papers. A lot of the cybersecurity framework documents are the same thing. The core, it's still 5 functions. They've increased the number of categories, really increased the number of subcategories, went from 100 to 139. Still the informative reference to online profiles and tiers and so forth. That's the link for it. I'll give you another page at the end, but also the link to get to the privacy framework. And they created a logo for it, which I really like. They had the government at the center and everything else around the outside. However, I do have a slight problem with the privacy framework logo. Anyone want to guess what my issue is? What was that?
Looks like Chrome.
I'm sorry. Oh, Chrome? Actually, no. That's not my issue.
Doesn't have a response.
No. My issue is this. You got identify over there in blue. Identify over here is in red. Why? Protect is blue. It's purple over there. I would prefer they use the same color. If it was a slightly different hue, that would have been fine. But the fact they use totally different colors for some of the same categories, I thought was, I didn't like that. But anyway, that's me. But I did like the fact they did come up with a neat logo. I do like that it's a circular logo because both of them had the same concept that, you might start at one point, but you're going to wrap around and continuously improve it. That's something I like with some of the framework logos that I've seen out there, which goes with a circular design, because the idea is it's not the mistake too many people do in implementing these frameworks. They're like, okay, I'm going to start at step 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, boom, I'm done. And it's like, no, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you loop around, and you start again in 1, and you keep on going, and you keep on going. Rinse, was it rinse, lather, repeat, or whatever. So, another thing they did, because they kind of expected that people would use the privacy framework with the cybersecurity framework with the functions, they added a P at the end to indicate privacy, to kind of do a separation, because people, they kind of expect them to mix them together. And in fact, one thing they did in version 1 that they dropped in version 1.1 was they actually added in here the cybersecurity framework function, which to me was a little bit confusing, because it almost give the feeling that, if you want to truly implement the privacy framework, you kind of had to use the cybersecurity framework in it. And it's like, that's really not the right way to do it. Something pretty straightforward. Identify as you understand your risks. Govern, you put the governance structure in place. Control is you want to manage, what's going on. Communicate, you want to be able to communicate what's going on, the data. And protect is you want to have data protection safeguards. This shows the functions as well as the categories. Most of it's pretty straightforward. Identify, saying identification, understanding your risk, your business environment. What I did think is also kind of interesting is they have in governance, control, communicate, and protect, they have specifically policies and procedures for each of those, set out as part of the categories. Because again, it's an important thing that you have these things defined and set down. And then, so going further, just to give you an idea of what it looks like for the subcategories, I grabbed the inventory one. So it's like you want to, of course, inventory your systems, products, and services that process data, but also things like your owners that process the data and the type of individuals whose data you have. Not just customers, but also employees, prospective employees, and so forth. The actions, the purposes, the data elements, all these things you want to understand that is affecting that data. Oops. So again, as I said, just as with the cybersecurity, the formative references are kept in an online catalog. And then with things such as crosswalks to tools and technical guidance and so forth, and regulations. So the idea is like, if I got to worry about GDPR, what in the GDPR regulations matches up with the privacy framework such that I can be able to address things. So far, they don't have a whole lot, but the ones they currently, they have GDPR there. They have this trust service criteria, which is from the SOC reports. Some other standards, such as this one from ISO 27701, which is privacy information management. So I'm a little concerned because they're actually in the process right now, coming up with a new version, and they have crossover for the cybersecurity framework. So, and I hope that this will increase now that 1.1 comes out, that we'll get more of these. Profile, again, if you're familiar with how profiles work with the cybersecurity framework, it's the same with the privacy framework. You figure out where you're at now, figure out where you want to go, and from there you work out, the roadmap to get there. Implementation tiers, again, I set somewhere to the cybersecurity framework of 1 to 4. The one thing I always had to tell people, because they see, there's tier 1 through 4. Oh, we need to get to 4. And no, that's not the way it works. If you read the cybersecurity framework, it says that as well, is they want you to at least get to 2. If it makes sense for your business to go to 3 or to go to 4, do so, but there is a cost involved with that may be too much for your organization. And then, but these are the elements that you are evaluated to determine where you are at for those different tiers. This is something from the book in terms of they show the kind of the matchup, as well as, government cyber framework crosses over with the privacy framework to deal with data breach. So that's why they had this idea that, hey, you're going to kind of oftentimes use them together to be able to protect data. And in the book, they have this very detailed plan of how to implement your privacy program, and they called it Ready, Set, Go. I didn't come up with this. This is in the. So you use that identify and govern to understand where you're at. Get your profiles in use, and then implement that plan and make it happen. They had this in the document, which I thought was kind of interesting, on how to implement the framework. What I really thought was interesting was the statement that I quote here, where it says the variety of ways in which the privacy framework can be used by organizations should discourage, emphasis mine, the notation of compliance with the privacy framework as a uniform or externally referenceable concept. Now, for some of you guys, they might say like, well, so what? But as a former consultant, that was something I saw a lot with companies in relation to the cybersecurity framework. They were coming out to me like, we want to be assessed against the cybersecurity framework. We want to know how we stand up against it. The worst, or at least the one that really kind of annoyed me, were the companies that were currently coming to us and they wanted their score against the cybersecurity framework. And I'm like, for my company, I was kind of like the expert, and I was like, tell my boss, I don't know what the hell they're talking about. There's no scoring with the cybersecurity framework. Of course, like, if I would have liked to be able to talk to the clients, but like, where are you getting this from? There is no scoring. We can do an assessment against the framework and say, no, where you stand, but there's no scoring. So I thought it was interesting they put this in here. And one thing is also I should also add what was also interesting when I went to the NIST workshops on the cybersecurity framework. One thing that a lot of people wanted from NIST is they wanted NIST to set down how we should assess companies or organizations against the cybersecurity framework. Because we have, that exists for things like the 27001 framework, things like that. And this is like, we're not interested in that. We don't want to do, we're not going to do an assessment standard for the cybersecurity framework and so on and so forth. So when I saw this, I was like, yeah, okay, I know where they're coming from, because I'm sure people were like, we want you to come up with a standard to assess, and this is like, yeah, we're not doing that. They leave that, they leave that sort of stuff to others. So whether we'll see that, like I said, I haven't yet seen organizations, like say insurance companies and regulators say like, ooh, you must be assessed against the cybersecurity framework. I don't know if we'll see that for the privacy framework. We'll see. But it should be interesting. So other resources from NIST, they have things, I actually brought a few of them with me. They have like, getting started with the privacy framework, they have a quick start guide. They have mappings from 1 to 1.1. They have a roadmap. That's something they also do with the cybersecurity framework. For like the roadmap is meant to be they see is the next, where they're going next with these things. So they'll need to have a new one, frequently asked questions and so forth. These are the things that this is from their prior roadmap, which of course they had to have a new one. So they're talking about having like somebody with a privacy risk assessment, and other, dealing with emergency technology, so forth. So we'll see how this comes with when they update this for the next version. I'm kind of curious. And this I pulled from their blog from 2021 to have 9 priorities. One was, of course, the privacy and having the resources, which I totally agree. That's one thing I've been kind of disappointed in, is that, with the cybersecurity framework, there's been like there's been a huge amount of buzz, a huge amount of work, coming not just from NIST, but from other organizations, and I'm not seeing that the privacy framework. And I really wish there was, because in my view, there's not really much of an equivalence. If you look on the security side, there's pardon my French, there's a shitload of security frameworks out there. But if you look on the privacy side, I don't see a whole lot. I mean, the only one I found was this, which is ISO 29100, which is a privacy framework, but it doesn't really compare. It doesn't really talk about true controls. I mean, I got this and I was like, really? So now here's my view. Again, I feel more people need to put it to use and make use of it. Don't expect a version 2 for quite a while. Just look at the cybersecurity framework. It went from like 4 or 5 years from the different versions. We're getting 1.1. And it's probably be 5 years before we see 2.0. I really want to see more community profiles. We have none at this point. Where's the freaking profile for, you're a doctor's office. Here's the profile for the privacy framework for a doctor's office. Here's the profile for a hospital. I want to see that, and not from NIST. I want to see that from, industry organizations, and we need more crosswalks. Like this thing here, there's no crosswalk for this. I want to see that. So anyway, Resources. This is where, you want to pull out a camera, if you will, to take shots. That's the website for NIST, for the privacy framework. You can download everything. Again, you paid for this stuff. It's there for free, which is great. They have a privacy engineering program. That's the website for it. If you're not familiar with the cybersecurity framework, that's the website for it. There's a lot. This is I think there's a more recent website at NIST, and this is kind of like a central hub. If you go here, there's actually, it'll take you, there's links from here to the CSF, the privacy framework, the risk management framework. It's pretty good. I've been doing it fairly often just to kind of keep an eye out what's new with NIST in that. So that's a good newer site they put together. I mentioned IAPP. This is the privacy. If privacy is your bag, you might want to consider joining them. This is this is the Association for Privacy Professionals. Even though they just say they're just IAPP. Like ISACA, they're no longer an acronym. Because they've also gotten into AI governance and stuff like that. They call their chapters knowledge nets. I don't know why. I do know there's one in South Florida. I've gone to their meetings a few times. There's one in Central Florida. There's one in Jacksonville. It's kind of interesting going to these meetings. Thank you. Because I'm a techie person. And when I go to the meetings with these privacy people, they're all like legal types. And I mean, it's almost worse. It's almost worse than going to an ISACA meeting where it's all, auditors and, stuff like that. So, they offer certifications, training, resources. That's one of the resources. They put out this book every couple of years. It's like my go-to for like privacy law and stuff like that. They have certs. Well, the main one is the CIPP. And because of all the freaking different regulations around the world, as you can see, they got 5 different versions of it. These are on my radar. I want to get the management one and the one for US. I thank God I don't have to worry about GPDR stuff.
Back to this one for China, a joke, or is
That's a good question.
it says that does privacy exists in Chinese law?
They have privacy laws. What I think, well, notice they have one for Asia, but it's one for China. Go figure. Anyway, ISACA came out with this, which I do have it. That always bothered me because I'm like, ISACA, you're IT audit people. You're not privacy people. Leave that to IAPP. But anyway. So any questions? Or am I just totally bored? Yes.
Do you think part of the explanation for why this is sort of like a back burner item for NIST, or at least why they have fewer resources dedicated to, as most domestic companies don't have to follow GDPR, so there isn't really like a hard and fast
Yeah.
app.
We don't have a US version of GDPR. It's all state level. And that's when they have to hear it through these meetings, which kind of annoys me because it's sort of like, clearly these people didn't go to a civics class. Because they're like, I mean, each state gets, that's how our country is done. It's not everything has to be done at freaking federal level. So, but it's a matter of, are people being forced to do these? I mean, even the thing is like, okay, if I don't do business in California, why do I care about that? So until we get something like that, a US, federal level version of GDPR, that's the thing, even in security, sort of like, unless someone comes along and said, you need to do this, or we're not going to do business with you. Most people are like, I don't care.
Right. It's hard to create like a national framework for something that differs state by state.
Exactly. Well, even in the privacy framework, they try to be kind of generic enough that, but again, I think something more like, if I'm not forced to use it, why should I do it? I mean, I would find when I was a consultant, the reason they were coming out for like, oh, we want this is because their clients were like, we want from you proof that you're HIPAA compliant. We want proof that you're this. We want proof and then when that happened, then they would come to us and like, oh, help us out and this sort of stuff. That's just the unfortunate part is that, unless someone are like kind of forced to do it, or be proactive, like if we don't do this, we're not going to get business. That's why, companies aren't going to go spend money to get a SOC report or get 27001 certified or I trust just for the heck of it. They're going to do it because someone, they're like, or like they said, hey, oh, you want insurance and you want to pay this amount or this amount, and oh, to get the difference, that's a huge discount. Let's have proof that you're this or that. That's just, I hate to be kind of cynical about it, but that's just, been my experience. Anything else? I think the next one up there. Yes.
So, springboarding off that question a little bit, I know there's a saying out there, GDPR, or sorry, GRC, so that maximum compliance is minimal study.
Yes.
At least for the privacy framework here, what do you feel like would kind of shift that narrative or that zeitgeist to be like, hey, it's great privacy, but let's people it all.
Well, the thing is, like a lot of things is companies are risk adverse if they're going to get spanked if they do something wrong. That's just the reality. When it comes to things like HIPAA compliance, which in many cases, a lot of these breaches are data breaches, which are breaches of PHI and this sort of stuff. When people see that, oh, if they get breached, they're going to get in trouble, charge money and this sort of, then suddenly they're like, oh, let's make this happen. That's when there's a lot of activity. But even then, it's more the big guys more than the small guys. One thing when you have a hospital where you've got, a whole compliance team and you got, legal counsel who is also the privacy officer, which is what I saw a lot of times, the actions like, but what about the small little doctor's office where I go in there and it's like, well, the office assistant is the de facto security officer or privacy officer, and they're doing the best they can. So just sad reality. But I think it's regulations, are upping the bar in terms like, you understand. And I think it's also if you look at HIPAA where like, if you have a breach, you get punished. But if you're looking at like, well, it wasn't just that it was a mistake. You were like blatantly not doing what you should have done to prevent it. Then it's a higher penalty. And, there's been matters where people were sent to jail because it wasn't just, oh, you made a mistake. It's like you were blatantly breaking the law and this sort of stuff. And then, maybe that started happening. Then maybe be like, let's make sure we're doing things properly.
So we're going to want the two options because like the privacy option.
Yeah, but when you're in a organization of maybe a half dozen people, doesn't quite work out, unfortunately. I mean, in my organization, we're 30 people and I'm security and privacy. But again, for us, it's a little bit different. We're not a doctor's office. I don't have to worry about people coming to me and say like, oh, I need access to my data and this sort of stuff. It's like, that's meaningless. We get information from our clients, which are healthcare organizations. It happens to contain PHI. So our concern is really to make sure it doesn't get breached. I'm not worried about getting access to someone. I'm not worried about, archiving the data or, you come to me and say like, oh, I want to check my data and make sure it's, not my concern, not having to worry about. Versus if I'm in a hospital, it's a large organization. I'm going to have a whole department for security, have a whole department for privacy. Yeah, you need that separated. But also, if you look at HIPAA, they even talk about, you want to make sure that the privacy person, the secretary are working together. You don't want two people like they're fighting each other or not cooperating. And then that's even worse disaster. So, thank you.